All right, let's jump right in. We're going to go on a journey today, but not to some far-off place. We're actually diving deep into the history of an idea, the study of comparative religion. And trust me, its origins are not what you'd expect. Forget quiet university halls, this story is way more dramatic.
So, let me ask you, when do you think we actually started comparing religions? If you're picturing a stuffy 19th century university with scholars in tweed jackets, well, that's what most people think. But the real story? It's so much older and way more intense. We're talking thousands of years earlier, and it didn't start with calm scientific study. No, it started with poetry, with philosophy, and with some really fierce, high-stakes arguments.
So here's our game plan. We're going to break this whole thing down into 4 key periods. We'll start way back in classical antiquity, then jump into the fire of early Christian conflict. After that, we'll see how things kind of narrowed down in the Middle Ages, and then, boom, we hit the Age of Discovery when everything just exploded. That's our roadmap for this whole story.
All right, first stop, ancient Greece and Rome. This is really where it all begins. Now, were they creating a science of religion? Not even close. But they were absolutely planting the first seeds, laying the groundwork for everything that would come later.
And this is a really important point. The Greeks and Romans had all the raw material you could ever want. I mean, their world was just packed with gods and cults. They knew all about the Egyptian gods, the Babylonian ones, Persian beliefs. They had the data, so to speak. But what they didn't have was the method, the science. Their approach just wasn't systematic. Not yet, anyway.
You know, the way the Greeks thought about their own gods wasn't a static thing at all. It changed a lot. It kind of started out simply enough with poets like Homer and Hesiod just collecting the myths. But then the philosophers showed up. Guys like Plato and Aristotle started asking the tough questions, you know? They were digging for deeper truths behind all these stories. And that led to this third phase, a really skeptical one, where people started to look at the gods in a totally new and pretty radical way.
And that skeptical phase led to some wild ideas. Get this, there was a thinker named Euhemerus who came up with this theory that the gods, well, they weren't gods, not really. He argued they were just famous, powerful humans from the past. Kings, heroes, that sort of thing. And their stories just got exaggerated over generations until people thought they were divine. I mean, that's one of the first attempts ever to explain where gods come from in a completely human way. Pretty revolutionary stuff for the time.
Okay, so let's shift gears. We're moving into a new era now, and everything is about to change. That calm, philosophical, armchair-style thinking of the Greeks, that's over. What comes next is way more urgent, way more confrontational. This stops being an academic exercise and becomes, well, it becomes an all-out intellectual battle for survival.
And what was the catalyst for this change? The rise of Christianity. This was the new force that basically supercharged the whole idea of analyzing religion. All of a sudden, comparing beliefs wasn't just some interesting hobby. For the early Christians, it was an absolute necessity. They had to know paganism inside and out, not just to argue against it, but to prove that their own faith was the one unique truth.
So this massive conflict basically created 2 competing teams, each with a totally different approach. On one side, you've got the Christian apologists. Their whole strategy was to analyze pagan myths and prove they were either tricks by demons or just distorted copies of older Jewish stories. The goal? To show Christianity was superior. Then, on the other side, you had the Neoplatonists. Their argument was that all those different pagan gods and rituals were just different ways of talking about one single supreme being. They were going for unity, for a grand, unified system. Right in the middle of this whole intellectual firestorm, this one guy, Augustine, comes along and does something incredible. He basically takes both of these threads and weaves them together. He didn't just argue about religion, he created a whole philosophy of history. He built this epic narrative of humanity with a beginning, a middle, and an end, all seen through a religious lens. And that framework, wow, it would literally shape Western thinking for the next 1,000 years.
So Rome falls, and from a European perspective, that huge, interconnected ancient world just shrinks. This brings us to our next phase, and this one is super important. The focus of comparing religions gets a lot narrower, but, and this is the key part, it also gets incredibly sharp.
Think about it. The old Greek and Roman pagan religions are basically gone. So the intellectual battlefield changes. For Christian thinkers in Europe, the other is now primarily Islam and Judaism. And that's a huge shift. You're not arguing against myths about Zeus anymore. Now you're engaging with these incredibly sophisticated, logical theologies. This forced everyone to get really good at debating. You had brilliant minds like Maimonides in Judaism and Thomas Aquinas in Christianity, pushing logic and philosophy to their absolute limits, just to defend their own worldview.
And here's the real takeaway from this period. The world they knew might have been smaller, but the tools they used to think about it got sharper than ever. It's kind of like this. Antiquity gave us the raw material. The early Christian era created the urgent motivation. But the Middle Ages? That was the forge. That's where the intellectual scalpels were sharpened to a razor's edge. They were perfecting the how of analysis, without even realizing they were creating the exact tools they'd need when the world suddenly got a whole lot bigger. Okay, so the stage is set. The intellectual tools are sharp and ready. And now, everything is about to break wide open. What comes next is, without a doubt, the single biggest game changer in this entire story. We're talking about the 15th to the 17th centuries, the age of discovery. This wasn't just about drawing new continents on a map. This completely and permanently changed how Europeans saw the entire world and what it meant to be human. It was a total paradigm shift. Just try to imagine it. For centuries, your world has been defined by Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And then suddenly, reports start flooding in from explorers and missionaries about an incalculable wealth of completely unknown religions, totally new gods, new rituals, new beliefs from Africa, the Americas, Asia. It must have been mind-blowing. It was a literal information explosion. And this just gives you a little taste of the scale we're talking about. The known world of religion didn't just get a little bigger. It multiplied, like exponentially. Every single ship coming back to Europe was carrying new stories, new data about what humans believed. And all of it had to be sorted through, understood, and somehow categorized.
So what was the result of all this? Well, for one, that limited medieval worldview was just shattered. It couldn't survive this flood of new information. It sparked this intense curiosity, both scientifically and culturally. But the most important result for our story is that all this new material, all these new beliefs, finally provided everything needed to pave the way for a real, actual science of religion.
So as we bring this all to a close, it really leaves you with something to think about, right? This entire epic journey, from Greek philosophy through fiery debates, all the way to global exploration, this is what built the foundations of how we study and compare religions today. So the question is, how do the echoes of that history, a history of defending, of attacking, of discovering beliefs, how does that still shape the way we try to understand different cultures, even now? It's a really interesting thing to consider, and it just goes to show that how we see the world is built on a foundation that's older and way more dramatic than we might think. Thanks for digging into this with me.